the floor here, it's raw here. Can't even sleep and ignore here, cause life's kinda militant. Stuck in the grime, nothing's equivalent to this cancer state of mind.
I think anarchism, I mean, it's the closest label I have to how I feel about the world. For me, anarchism, I mean, there's two kind of main forms of anarchism, I would say. There's like the political form, which is like from the 1840s, where it is a political idea, you know, that the society can be built in a collective way. So there's that kind of political side to it, which I agree with a lot. And then there's also the kind of artistic side to anarchism, where anarchism is almost like a spirit of rebellion and freedom and liberty of the individual against all rules, whether they be religious or the government. So I've always kind of seen myself as a free thinker and someone that challenges the status quo, and definitely like the political structures of my society and generally the societies I see around the world, and capitalism really. So yeah, I define my outlook creatively, politically, as being an anarchist. But you know, that it's a label, and it's the closest label I can find to describing myself. Well, some of the actors, I have a very close relationship with them. It's not so much I knew them before, but as I've worked with them, I've got to know them very well. And the way I work anyway is we are like a family. So my cast and my crew, we're very small, we're very close-knit, we're very creative. So even if an actor I don't know so well, very quickly from working with them, we bond. And definitely with my last film, SSDD, I used actors from Capital and The Plague. So I wrote it in mind with those actors. And definitely there's, I like this idea of using some actors again and again, because as a director I have a wonderful relationship with them. I consider myself a guerrilla filmmaker. I never really got into filmmaking to make commercials or mainstream TV. I've always wanted my films and cinema as an art form to make people question. I understand that my films aren't for everyone. Some people love them, some people hate them, and I'm happy with that. And I just find this way of working, a lot of it is because the industry doesn't fund me, doesn't support me, even though sometimes I have very nice things written about me. So a lot of the times it's out of necessity, because I don't want to wait around and go, I want to make a film. I actually, you know, want to express and make those films. I wouldn't turn down money from the industry, but also I wouldn't wait around my whole life for a film to be funded. I would rather just keep making films, because that is how you learn. Definitely with Capital, I had funding and I was given complete creative freedom. So I wanted to use that creative freedom to really experiment, to really move away. I'm very proud of Capital. I think some things don't work, some things do work. And it's a learning experience. And I think because I made The Plague and because I made Capital, it brought me to SSDD, where definitely I feel like I came back. I found myself again in some respects. And with SSDD, it's almost like I went back to my roots, but I had learnt so much through those two other features that I could take the best of both and put that into SSDD. They're not the same characters, but the relationships, sometimes you could view it as if it is the same characters, especially as like one's been to prison, they used to know each other. I definitely was using elements that I knew had worked with The Plague. The characters are slightly different, but I think if you viewed it as my body of work, you could say yes, the characters, there's a progression there, there's a maturity, but you know, they're not meant to be the same characters, but definitely there's a unity, an affinity there between SSDD and The Plague. Capital was very much about society, and it was the composer and the commissioner joked about calling it Das Kapital, and I was like, well, Capital, that's a great title. Then with SSDD, that's a saying. It's very much a common thing that we say, you know, same shit, different day. But it also happens to be a short story by Stephen King, which is how I knew the expression as well. So, I mean, for me, I see culture, there's nothing really original about culture. We're often reinventing, so I kind of acknowledge the fact that I'm borrowing I'm an anarchist. I'm happy to take a title here, take an influence from there. I'm not too worried about that. So yeah, there's no real thematic links beyond me as an artist taking and picking and choosing. Like Peter Watkins, a British filmmaker, Alan Clark that you mentioned, definitely a big fan of Scum, The Farm, Made in Britain. So I draw some influence from them. But as a kid, I used to watch like Steven Spielberg films, films like Jaws. So I draw a lot of influences from various cinema, from music, from books. I see kind of all culture. I like to be a sponge and just absorb it. And if I like something, I would take that, but I would reinvent it, I would develop it in my own style and fashion. I guess I'm really just kind of reflecting my views and my opinions, and I grew up with friends who are black, Asian, white, and it's almost like a generation. It's not to say that racism isn't still prevalent within society, but definitely within people, it's a lot more broken down, and I think class is the main thing. That a young black lad from a state, like with SSDD, a young black lad from prison, works with an old northern guy who's been involved in riots, they have far more in common, and it's nothing to do with race, it's to do with class. So for me very much, and that's again why I would view myself as an anarchist, I view the world through a class understanding, and that's really my main issues. Race is still in there, racism is still in there, and I still like to deal with it, but really it's about class. The class system within Britain is one of the oldest class systems, and it's something that gets me very angry, and which is why again I'm an anarchist. I believe all human beings are equal, and it's the class system that keeps us kind of divided. Punk is just one expression of anarchism, and likewise I think hip hop is another expression of anarchism, because anarchism to me is from the bottom up, is without rules, it's about people expressing themselves. Punk was all about that, hip hop was about that, dance music was about that, so many different cultures. So really, I started making films when I was 14, and I was using a home video camera, plugging it into a VHS machine. I was making my family act in all my films. So I came from that approach of do it yourself, DIY, which punk was about. But so many things. The hippies in the 60s were about that. And for me, I don't view anarchism as just being a circled A with, spiky hair. Anarchism's a spirit and a feeling of rebellion and liberty, and that's really where I kind of draw my influence from. And hip-hop, the main influence behind my first film, The Plague, was the British hip-hop scene. It inspired me because they were releasing their own records, they were promoting their own gigs, they were building up their own fan bases outside of the corporate and commercial world. Just as the punk scene, with bands like Crass, were doing in the 70s and early 80s. Same thing the hip-hop guys are doing in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, really that's where I draw my influence from. But I am at the moment adapting a book which is set, a lot of it's set during the 70s and 80s, so I will actually be exploring the kind of punk years. But yeah, because I'm an anarchist doesn't mean I don't just wear black, I appreciate that there's many levels of the police. There is like community police, where these are just people who help get a cat down from a tree. They might come to your house if you've been burgled. I understand that they feel that they are helping society. Then I think you get another level of the police where it's like the riot police. In Britain they're called the TSG, the Tactical Support Group. These people really, they like dressing up in armour, they like having weapons, they like fighting. That's the plain truth about it. And I think historically, when there's been civil uprisings, insurrections or revolutions, normally, historically, the police always side with the government, whereas the army usually defect and go with the people. And this says a lot about the institution of the police. And I think you must look at why they were founded and their role within society. And their role is purely to protect the ruling class. So yeah, I appreciate that people are part of the police, so I would never say that they themselves are the lowest form of humanity, but I would say that the idea of the police force as an institution within society is the lowest idea of humanity.